Hello guys, you are welcome back to my YouTube channel. I remain your favorite coach, Coach Ola. Today I'm going to be discussing and building a project together with you using Python and SQL. Now, if you are a data analyst or a data scientist or a data engineer and you haven't worked with Python and SQL, I think this video is really for you. You really want to see the importance and the magic you can perform using Python and SQL. Now, I understand that a lot of us are scared about learning programming language. Yes, I think that is the more reason why a lot of people, either as a data analyst or data scientist, I think mostly this happens to data analysts with my experience. Most of them are comfortable using Excel and Power BI or Tableau for visualization. They don't really want to go into programming. But I must tell you, programming is one of the easiest things on earth. Seriously, if you understand the in and out, the concept behind it, so there's nothing difficult about programming. It's all about putting puzzles together, really. So today I'm going to be discussing how important and the advantage of using Python and SQL on your next project. Today I'm going to be building a project with you using Python and SQL. Now, before we going straight into the project, what is Python and what is SQL? Now, Python programming language is a computer program that is used in giving instructions to the computer. The same way you have your human language. Human language like English, Yoruba, Hausa, and some other languages as well are used in giving instructions to human beings. The same way we give instructions to the computer using the computer programming language. There are many programming languages on earth today. One of the most popular one is Python programming language, my favorite actually. Now, Python programming language is one of the simplest programming language, no doubt, and I call this the Swiss knife army of programming language. Why? Because Python programming language can handle different numbers of tasks. You can think of your mobile development, website development, machine learning, data analysis, data engineer, DevOps, cybersecurity, and many more. Python programming language can be harnessed in any of these fields, so which make it a very important language that you might want to learn. Now, why SQL, which is also called structured query language, it's also a kind of programming language, but more of a dedicated programming language because it can only be used to communicate and manipulate data within a database. You understand? And both programming language are not difficult. Remember, what you need to understand is concepts. The concept behind every programming language is the same thing. Trust me, it doesn't really matter whether it's JavaScript, whether it's Java programming language, whether it's C#, doesn't really matter. What you need to understand is what is the logic and the concept behind those programming language. And once you can get that, it's very easy for you to write any instructions using any of this language. So today, I'm going to be building a project around one of the things I love doing as a data scientist and also someone transiting into data engineer. I love moving data around. One of the things that I love, just like you have these skills, there are many other skills within it. You understand? And I used to explain this to people a lot. Being a data analyst, there are also skills within a data analyst. That there's a skills in data analysis that has to do with data cleaning, that has to do with exploratory data analysis, data modeling. So within each of those skills, there are also some sub skills within those skills which you need to learn very much. And one of the skills I love, or one of the things I love doing, is moving data from one source to the other. I enjoyed it a lot, which is more like the major role of data engineers. So data engineers majorly build pipelines that enables you to move data from one source, maybe from point A to point B. So that's what data engineers do. So today I'm going to be putting the Python and the SQL together to build a simple project, actually a simple project. But within this simple project, I'm going to be talking a lot about different concepts um so more like how you can handle error, how you can create variables. I'm also going to be talking about how you can create virtual environments. A lot of things I'm going to be talking within this particular project. So if you're a beginner in Python, or you haven't even tried you haven't tried Python programming language before, I think this video is still for you, because it's going to motivate you. It's going to show you how these things are being done. I'm going to be explaining each of the code line by line. So this video might take uh, some hours, and probably I'm going to divide this into part one and part two, just for you to be able to like get the idea of everything that we're discussing here. And I won't want the video to be so long as well, but trust me, I'm going to be breaking everything down. So this project is going to be involving moving data from one point to another point, and the point I'm going to be moving the data from is going to be an API. And I think you'll be glad. One of the things you want to really know how to do when it comes to programming is how to consume API. I'm going to be explaining what API is once we get into the project. And we're going to be moving this data to a database, a structured database, which is MySQL. I'm going to be using MySQL. All right, I think I've explained what this project is going to be about. Without wasting much time, let's get into coding. All right, guys, so this is the website we are going to be working with. This is actually a fixed store API. It's a good API, majorly for e-commerce websites. So imagine, as a developer, you have a front-end application and you are yet to build the backend, or the backend is yet to be ready. You can actually use the fixed store API to populate some information or data onto your website. So let's go into the documentation of this website and see what we have there. So as you can see, this particular website provides us with a list of endpoints, basically for handling products, cards, and users, and the information are going to be returned in a JSON format. A JSON format is a kind of data format which is referred to as a JavaScript object orientation. Is a kind of format that is used to communicate data between two systems, which is what an API is all about. So in this particular project, we are going to be getting some information like products, all the cards, and as well all the users. So these are different endpoints, but these are not important to us right now, since we are not updating, we are not deleting any of this information. Our work is to get all this data, just like moving this data from this point to another point, which is our database. So the first thing I'm going to do right here is to test each of these endpoints to see what they return back to me. I'm going to open a new, so you can see that this is a data being reported to me, and this is a JSON structure, which is a list of dictionaries. The same thing I'm going to do for the cards, just to test the endpoints as well. Now to get all the cards, so use the endpoints, open a new tab, and as well test this as well. You can see, and the last, which is the users, to get all the list of the user, I have this. Okay, this is the endpoint for the list of all the users within this particular API. All right, so these are the list of the users as well. So the first thing we need to do right here is to configure our code, to implement some code to get all this information from this particular website and store them into the database. Now, the first thing we need to do, we are going to use a tool right there, which is called the Visual Studio Code. So if you don't have the Visual Studio Code, you can easily go ahead and download that online. And if you have other code editor you are using, so it's also fine, but I prefer the Visual Studio Code. You have your Windows, so you have versions for Windows, Linux, and for Mac as well. So it's good that you pick the one suitable for your system. All right, so I already have Visual Studio Code installed on my system, so obviously I'll just go ahead and open this. So I'll open a new window, so just that you may see this. So this is a new window right here, and I'm going to open a new folder. of my Visual Studio Code. Alright, I'll update that later. Alright, so let's open. So, and I'm going to create this on my desktop. Let's create a new folder on my desktop, and I'm going to call this Python dash MySQL. You can name your project anything. So, and I'm going to open this directly. Alright, so this has been opened. So now we have our folder, we have our VS Code ready. Now the next thing we need to do right here before getting down into coding is to prepare a virtual environment. Now a virtual environment is very important to be able to manage the dependency within your project. It's very, very important. So install your dependency. So you can open this your folder in an integrated terminal, just like this. And I'm going to be creating a virtual environment using the command Python 3 -m -vnv. So that's all you need. So if you try Python 3 and it doesn't work for you, you might as well want to try Python. So depending on the kind of version of Python you have installed on your system. So for me, Python 3 works, and you can see virtual environment has been created. So that is not done. You also have to start the virtual environment by using a command source -bin/activate. So this is going to activate your virtual environment. For those using Windows, the command is different. I can see the command up here or down here somewhere. But if you are using Mac and Linux, so this work for you. So as you can see now that my virtual environment has been started, that's why you see this VNV. Now we have our virtual environment start. So I'm going to install some basic libraries that I'm going to be using. I'm going to be doing that by saying pip install request. So we need the request library, and I'm also going to be needing MySQL connector, which is going to enable us to connect our MySQL database, just like this. Okay, I think I don't need a comma to do multi-installation. Alright, so this is going to install those two libraries for me all at once. So I believe that is installed. Okay, so I'm going to clear my terminal. Now let's go ahead and prepare our project. So the first thing I'm going to do right here is to create a file within my project. I'm going to call this the main.py. So which is going to be my main project. I'm as well going to undo my exceptions. So I'll create a new file for handling my custom exceptions, and create a new file as well for handler. So it's important that before you get started with any project, spend some time understanding the project and how you want to go about it. So one thing I've done before starting this video is understand the approach I want to take in building this project. So the main.py is more like my starting point of where my project is going to start from. The handler is going to be handling my API consumption and also flattening the data from the API. The exception is more like a custom exception that I'm going to be throw out to my user. And one last one which I'm going to create is let's call it schema.py. So this one is going to handle my database, so which has to do with creating the tables, creating or inserting data into the tables. So that's what this guy is going to do. So I'll start with the exception. Let's create my custom exception. So what custom exception is that in programming, when you are writing your Python code or any kind of code you are writing, you might run into some certain error. So it's good to always handle your error. We call that error handling or exception handling. Most of the time you can use your try and your except. And when you use your except to throw an error, you can only throw inbuilt errors, but sometimes you can create your own custom exceptions as well, which is what I want to do right here now. All right, so let's create a class. So I'm going to create a class called API. So what this actually means is that anytime I call an object of this API exception, so I'm going to give the code, which is the status code of that particular error message or successful message, and I'm going to also return a message as well. So basically those are the two things I want to return, and I'm going to also define a new function, which is the string representation of this particular function, which is just going to return a string. Going to return a string, which I'll just say is, let's use a formatted string. Okay, doesn't really matter. So I choose to do it this way. Return the code, then after returning the code as well, I'm also going to return the message. So this is just the string representation of our class. Alright, then after that, let's come to the handler as well. So on the handler, this way I'm going to be handling my API. This way I'm going to be consuming those information right here. So, and the first thing I want to do right here is to create a function that can be used to get any information from those particular endpoints. So I'm going to import my request, and I think for now request, and also import my exception as well. So in case anytime I want to throw an exception, from my exception, I'm going to import the API exception just like this. Now let's create a function that's going to fetch us the data from the API just like this. So anytime you call this, you have to give the URL endpoint. So which obviously is going to be a string, and it's going to return a list. What this function is going to do right here is going to accept a string, which is going to be my endpoint. So either product, user, or cat. Remember, those are the three endpoints we are looking at. So whenever you use this function and you pass in either product or cat, it's going to make a request to that particular URL. The base URL is already defined up here, which is http fast fixstore api.com slash what slash this particular endpoint right here. Okay, and I think I miss this string is not meant to be here or here. All right, so this will now form a complete URL. You understand? Just like, for example, if a user pass product into this function, so it's going to complete this URL, and this URL becomes what product, just like this. And the same way, if you pass user, it's modified the URL to what user or either cat. That way we can use this same API, this particular function, to get any data from either of those API, right? So that is clear, and that's how that particular function will fetch our data. Another thing that is also important that we also understand here, you can test this out. Let's test it the way let's test this function before we go ahead. So I can bash into my interactive Python shell, and I'm just going to import, so let's say from this particular file, which is handler, from handler import fetch data. So I'm importing this function. So if I'm going to create a variable, or better, so let's just call it straight away. So I'll say fetch underscore data, which is the function, and I'm going to pass, let's say, users in it. So as you can see, this fetch all the users information, and this is a good sign that the function actually works. So you can use this function to fetch any endpoint at any point in time. Is that clear? So let's exit and clear the terminal. All right, so now the handler is good. Another thing I also observe in this data here before we move on is that if you look at each of these endpoints, for example, if you look at product, for example, products within each of these dictionary that we have right here. So the rating, for example, if you look at, we have different keys within the dictionary. We have ID, we have title, we have price. So if it comes to rating, rating on its own is a key that is also a dictionary, not just a single value, a dictionary. So it's important that we flatten this data, because where we are moving this data to is a relational database, which is MySQL. And one thing about MySQL is that MySQL only stored structured data, and structured data are usually in tabular form, which means rows and column. This thing being an unstructured data will not fit into our relational database. So it's important that we use our Python code to flatten this particular dictionary. The same thing goes for cat as well. If you look at the cat information as well, so within each of the dictionary, they are also nested dictionary. Same thing go for user, they are also nested dictionary as well. So it's important that we flatten each and every one of them. And I think that's the next thing I'll go ahead and do in my handler. I'm going to be creating individual function for the product, for the cat, and as well for the user, which is going to help me to flatten each and every one of them into a more like a single dictionary rather than a dictionary of a dictionary. All right, so let's get into that. So I'm going to rates. So if you look at the rating needs to be flattened. If we look at the rating, you have rates, I have count within that particular rating. So which means that is a nested dictionary. So we need to flatten it so I can be able to store data in a relational database. So I'm going to create a key rating underscore rate, which is going to get the data from product, and it's going to call the key rating. And when I call the key rating, the rating is returning a dictionary, which I can also call the rates within that particular dictionary. So just like this. The same way, I'm going to create a variable called rating underscore count. And I'm going to do the same thing, product, and call the key rating. Then I can easily call the count. So that way I'll be able to flatten this data. So and I'm going to return my product. So this will give us a flattened dictionary of this data right here. All right, so let's move on to the next function. Create another function to flatten the user. So the same way, we're also going to take each of the user dictionary. Zip code, just like this, zip code. All right, so I think this is also done. I want to return, this function is going to return each of the flattened dictionary. So what do we name that? User dict. All right, so that's also flattened. So the same way, I'm also going to flatten the cat as well. So I'll say flatten underscore cat, and it's going to take each of the cats, which is a dictionary but unflattened. I want to return a dictionary, which is what? A flattened dictionary, just like that. So let's see how the cat also look like. So the cat has ID, user ID. So I'm going to create cat underscore dict, which is going to store my flattened dictionary, and the first key there is ID, which is going to be from cat ID. We also have user ID, which is the user adding the cat, adding the product to the cat. We have cat user ID. We as well have the date that the product was added to the cart, just like this. We have cards, so not to be flattened yet too, but as per the product we have something to be flattened. So if you look at the product, within each of the cards the user can add one or more products within a particular cart. So it's important that here you need to be dynamic here, because a user can add 3 cards, and a user might add 3 products to the cart, and that user might add 5, and that might add 1. You understand? So it's important that you understand how you are going to map this. So basically we need 2 fields, which is the product ID and the quantity, to hold this value. But it's important that you understand that within the product key there are many dictionaries inside. So which means we need to index through each of these lists, index it to get each of those values out. All right, so I'm going to do that. So let's say create a variable called product ID, so which is going to be cart, and you have a key called product, which is what we are calling here. But after calling the product give you the list of the data. or we need to get each and every one of these. So imagine within this list, because list Python list can only be indexed numerically, like 0, 1. So imagine I call the first dictionary here, which is index 0. So if I do this, so this will give me this first dictionary, which is this guy here. So within that, I can now call my product ID, just like this, product ID. And the same thing I will do for quantity as well. So which means for quantity, I can have quantity. Say same thing, index 0 too, I'll have quantity. So but this is not really dynamic, because after getting the value of the index 0, so you want the program to move to index 1, then index 2. So the same way, if you have another person probably which is 2, so we don't want this to be hard coded. So the best thing you can do is to probably look through the length of this product. So depending on the length of product added to the other particular cart, so I'm able to get that information. So what I can do here is to wrap this around a for loop, this guy here. So let's create a for loop around it. So I'll say for, let's call it index, in the range, so in the range of the length of the cart product. So and what that simply means is that based on the length of each product, like the length of this product right here, if you look at the length here, this is 0, 1, 2, so the length is going to be 3. So that means the loop can run 3 times to get each and every product and the quantity out for us. So it's good to indent this properly within a for loop. Now, and that's way I don't have to add code this again, so it's going to be indexed. So once the loop started, whatever the position of the index is, so it's going to get us the value. Now, one interesting thing I also find out here is this, because by the time you use your for loop to get the data, imagine I use my for loop to get the data for this particular guy, this product, for only this particular user ID, we are going to have 3 informations, because this particular user ID added 3 products. So that means in the relational database it's going to be like 3 record for just this particular cart. So it won't just be 1 record anymore like the way you see it here. It's going to be 3 record, because for every of the record we are going to have different products ID that was added and the quantity that was added. So that way I cannot use the return keyword here to return that dictionary, but rather I will use what yield. What yield we do here is that yield is similar to your what can I call it? It's similar to your return statement. You understand? But doesn't, with return, you can only return when you use your return after your function, is just to return a single statement at a time. But with yield, when you return a statement, it come back again, it give continuation to this function to return more things. So basically, yield can be used to return multiple things, while return keyword can only return one thing at a time. I hope that is clear. So you can easily read more about this online. So I will read out my cart dictionary. So just like this, and I hope we are done with this. So this is what the handler is going to do. So the handler, like I explained, is helping us to fetch data from the API, and it's also helping us to flatten the dictionary. So that is just the major work of the handler. So now let's go to the schema. So in this schema, I'm going to be defining what my database is going to look like. So here I'm going to be creating my tables to map this particular data one after the other. So remember that every data that we are fetching here has to be stored, has to be represented in a database. So let's go into that. So in my schema.py, that's where I'm going to be putting every structure of our table. So to do that, I'm going to be importing this one. I'm going to be importing my MySQL connector now to connect to a database. And to connect to your database is very simple. Okay, I don't think I even need to connect my database here. I won't do that right here. I'll possibly do that in the I will do that in the main.py. So let's create a function, and I'll call this create product. So the one that's going to create my product underscore table. So remember, your product table has all these field here. Why am I having warning message somewhere? Okay, let me remove this since I'm not returning a dictionary. So it's a dictionary, but it's now it's not more one dictionary now. It's more than one dictionary. All right. So basically, what I can do right now. So look at your product. So our product that we want to store into database have column for ID, title. So we need to map this into our database. So let this be right here. So back to my schema now. So back to my schema. So for the table I want to create, my table is going to need a connection. So we are going to see what the connection is later on. And also going to need a cursor to be able to execute that. So what I need to do right here now is to define a query that I'm going to run. So I'm going to just say cursor dot execute. So I want to execute this query. And once I execute the query, I also want to commit. I'll say connection dot commit. So very soon you see what this commit and this connection is. And once that is done, let's use a logger to say the table was successfully created rather than printing it. So import, do the same thing right here. So I can then use my logger right here, then to pass an information to this terminal. And here I just want to say table product, just like this, was successfully created. All right. So I think I should make this single quotes. Okay. And that's it. So I'll undo my exception just in case an error occurs. I can see MySQL dot connector dot error as MySQL as error. So I need to import the MySQL connector so I can easily catch any error that happens with my database. So I'll say import MySQL dot connector. So the dot error class will enable me to handle any error that happens while I'm within database. So when that happens, I also want to say, so let's just say an error occurred while creating while creating table. so that the error can get printed out. Okay, I think that's clear. So this enable me to create the table I need to create. So I can see. So this is where the data looks from the endpoint, and you can see that there's similarities. So every column that we have here is being mapped to the database, just like this, right? So the same thing, I'm also going to create table for the other ones as well. So since we have every table for every information, so since we have for products, obviously we're also going to have for user. So let's see, and I can just save my time by just making a copy of this function here. So and then just do some little changes. So this is going to be user table. So and that way we can execute the query, and we can see we are creating user step successfully, and if an error occur, it's going to tell us an error occur. So the same way, I create another table for the third one as well. So which is going to be cat. So create table, create cat table, and this is going to be cat. So let's look at the information of the cat. So for the cat, we have ID. We already have an ID. We have user ID, which is obviously an integer. We have the dates, So for the dates, this can be in a data type, maybe dates, because if you look at the information we have here, in the date of the cat, I think it's in date and time. So we as well can store this in date and time, but not to save all the stress, let's just save it as a text for now. So I'll save it as a text. So when I get to MySQL, I can do some data cleaning to change this back. But right now we'll go with text. So after date, we have the product ID and we have quantity. So we have product ID, which is product ID is as an integer, and we have quantity. So we have quantity, and quantity obviously will be in an integer, just like this. All right. So then whenever this runs successfully, I can say cat was created successfully, and if an error occur, I will also know if an error occur. So that way we can have those tables being created. So if I run this code, so these three tables are going to be created. So just like that. So I think this is clear right now. All right, the next thing will now be, since we have created this table, the next thing will now be inserting data into this particular table. So how do you insert? Because for every of the data we get here too, we need to run a query, so that's going to help me to insert that particular data. And the same thing, that's what I'm also going to do in my schema, so to enable us to do that. So the next thing for us is to write some queries that will enable us to do this. And not to save time, so I'm just going to fast forward this video and then just write some queries about how to insert the data into this particular database, and then I'll be explaining that later on. Alright, so if you look at this right now, so I have some insert statements. So we have one that inserts data into the product. So and the query is using MySQL, we have insert into product. So this is going to insert into product the ID, the title, so every data in that particular column. So take the values one after the other, then run the query, then commit the changes. And when this committed successfully, you have data inserted into the table successfully. And if an error occurs, we have this error occur. So each of these functions is going to take the data, and data is going to be every dictionary I read from that particular API. Remember, we are reading data from the API, which is a list of dictionaries. Then we flatten each dictionary inside. So for every flattened dictionary is what I'm going to be passing into this, inserting into data, and it's going to be inserting them into the tables that we have created. Same thing for the cards, so we have that as well. Same thing for the users, we have that as well. And these are going to insert the data one after the other into our tables. So that's where we are going to have a copy of the data that we have on the website or on the API in our database. So let's go and implement the main.py, which is where the whole magic is going to happen. And in order for us to do this, so let's import all these modules, both the handler and the schema. Let's import them. So in order for me to be able to do this, I'll go ahead and say import my handler. At the same time, I'm going to import my schema, obviously. So those two modules are very, very important. So in order for me to start this, I'll just say if my main equals to name. So the first thing I want to do once this application starts is to actually connect to a database, just the same way your application run on databases. So when this application starts, it's going to start on a database. So because of that, I will need to import my MySQL as well. I'll say import MySQL.connector. So now how do I connect to the database? So I'm going to say try, and I'm going to create a connection. I'm going to call that connection. And to create a connection with my MySQL, I'm going to say MySQL.connector.connect. So for this connect, I'm going to provide some variables, some arguments like what is the user name that is going to connect to this database. Exactly. So for this, my username. So the best thing to do right here is not to expose your username. So you don't want to say, so you can say, for example, if you are using MySQL, so your username can be root, for example. So, and I will say password. So for my password, so it's not good to expose your password. So, but for now, for learning sake, you can just type in your password. My thing to do here, the best practice to use a virtual is to create an environment. So in that environment, you can hide your credentials to your database or keys, API keys, all those kind of things. So you can hide them in your environment. So, but I'm not going to cover that right here. So after entering your password, the same thing, you enter the host, and the host, so it's going to be obviously local host, and then we have the last, which is the database, which is the name of the database in that particular MySQL. So I'm going to call this fake store. Right now I've not created database, so I'm going to do that later on. Then after you make your connection, if connection dot maybe successful, so it's underscore connected. So if this is true, so I just want to return a statement that say maybe so if this is true, just create a cursor for me. Alright, so I can then create my cursor. So the connection is connected to database, while the cursor is what I need to always execute any query, anytime I want to execute a query. So that's going to be created from connection dot cursor. So just like this. So when that is done, I can just use my logger again. So it's I have to repeat this again. So I can just add this, then import my login, and I can use my logger right here. So let's use logger to just log an information to the terminal, and I'm just going to say database successfully connected. Right. So once you are able to connect the database successfully, so the next thing I want to do is now to create all those tables. So which is every table that we have in the. So we need to create all the tables. Create tables. So all the tables that I've created into my schema. So I need to say schema, since I've imported it, dot, so I'll call create. So this creates a product table, and I have to pass this argument inside, that's the connection and the cursor. So my connection equals to connection, which is the variable up here, and then the cursor is just going to be cursor. So those two things are what this function needs to connect. So that's the connection of database, and the cursor to execute the query. The same thing from the schema as well. I'm going to call the function create the cart, and the same way I'm going to call my connection within it, and as well my cursor within it as well. So, and then my schema does the same thing to create the product, the user table, and that as well is going to need a connection, pass the connection to the database, and as well the cursor as well, which is going to be cursor. So that way these three are going to be created. Now the next thing, that once data are now created, once the tables are created, I want to go ahead and insert all the data as well. So let's start with the product. Insert products. So to insert your product, the first now first of all do is to at least fetch data first. So let's fetch all the product data. So, and I'm going to fetch that since I've imported my handler. So I'm going to say handler dot call the function that will define which is fetch data, and I'll pass the endpoint, which is product. So this will go ahead and fetch all the product, which is a list of dictionary that we saw from the API. So after we have fetched that, the next thing now was what, for every dictionary inside this list, for every product in this product data, which is a list of dictionary, we want to now want to flatten each and every one of them. So that is where I will say my product. So let's say product date equals to, remember we call from the handler as well, we also call our flatten product. So this will flatten the product. So for every dictionary I pass into this guy, so it's going to flatten them, and when you flatten them, so maybe I should call this flatten it. So you store them into this new dictionary. Now that new dictionary, so let me add a comment here. So this flatten each dictionary. So for every of the dictionary you flatten, now I now want to insert it into the database. So that means I'll have to go ahead and call my schema, and I'm going to say dot insert into product, and I'm going to pass the data to be equals to the flattened dictionary, and don't forget your connection, which is going to be the connection to the database, and then the cursor as well, which is going to be the cursor to execute the query. As simple as that. So this fetch the data, fetch data from API. So for every data, for every dictionary within the API, you flatten them and then insert into table. As simple as that. So that inserts our product. So let's insert for the cat as well. So the same thing. So I have to create an API as well. So I can say cat underscore data. So and I'm going to say handler the same way. Call the same function fetch. For this time around, we are going to pass what cat. Now for every cat in this cat, in the cat data, so what you want to do as well is to flatten them. So let's call it flatten underscore cat, which is going to be from your handler dot flatten. So you call it flatten cat, and then you pass the cat inside. So this flatten every dictionary. So once you get the flatten dictionary, then you can then go ahead and insert it. But don't forget that this cat, just like we defined here, we use the yield when we are flattening the cat. Remember very well, when we're flying the cat, we use yield. That's because this one function can return multiple dictionary at a time. So that's way I'm going to loop through it to have access to those data. So it's imagine that this flat cat is not returning a single flattened dictionary, it's returning multiple flattened dictionary. So now for it to now have access to it, we have to loop through it. Let's say for dit, let me say for cat in flattened cat. So don't let the name confuse you. So that one now give me access to individual dictionary within that dictionary. So it is that one that will now go ahead and say schema dot insert into cat. I can see the data I want to insert is this cat, and my connection is going to be connection, and my cursor is going to be cursor, just like this. Alright, and the next thing as well is to insert the user. So the same way, I'm going to say user underscore data, and for the handler as well, which will help me to fetch the data of the users, just like this. And when you fetch it, I want to say for every user, in the user data, I want to flatten them by saying flatten underscore user, and I want to say handler dot flatten, call it flatten user, just like this, and I pass the user inside. So that flatten the user, and for every user you now flatten, now I want to now say schema dot insert. So insert them into the user table by saying our data equals to the flattened user, and our connection equals to connection, and our cursor equals to cursor, just like this. All right, and I think that is good. So once we connect to this database, if the connection is successful, I create my cursor, create the table, insert all the data. All right, so now I can now undo the exception error. So except when MySQL.connector dot error, so I say as error. So I can then use my logger as well to log an information saying that error occurred while connecting to MySQL. So just like this. All right. So, and when that is done, I want to say finally. So when that is done, whether connected successfully or not. So, but if the connection, so if connection dot is connected, so just in case the database is connected, after doing all this operation, so all I just want to do is to close all my resources. So I close the cursor and I close my connection as well. So this is a good practice. So dot close as well. And I can just tell my user using the logger that my SQL connection closed. Alright, that way we save our resources. Alright, so I think everything is good with our exception, the handlers, where we're handling the APIs, everything is good. We have our schema where we are creating the table and also inserting the data, and the main.py. So I think the next thing for us now is to test this application generally, run this. But before we go ahead and do that, we need to create a database in our system that has this particular database in it. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll go ahead and open my MySQL Workbench. So it's important that you have MySQL Workbench installed on your system. Alright, so I'll go ahead and open that. So I think I should move it right here. So this is my MySQL Workbench, and I'm going to log in right here. As you can see, the username is root. So whatever your password is, which is what you have provided into your program, so I will go ahead and let me try that again. So I say okay. Alright, so now the first thing you want to go ahead and do is to create a database. So let's create a database with what we have said. So to create a database, say create database. So I say if not exist, and based on the name we have given to it right here, we have quick store. So I'll just say quick store, and now let's execute this. Once you execute this and it runs successfully, you can refresh your schema up here, then you have the database. And to use the database, so you can see what database look like. So you can just double click on it and see what database. So you need some tables to store your data. So the tables has been created already. So all I just need to do is to run my application. So let's go ahead and test this. So let's exit out of this Python. So clear my terminal. Now to run my Python code, I'll say Python main.py. As you can see, everything inserted, table has been created, data has been inserted, and once it's done, you can see MySQL connection closed. Alright, so let's go ahead and see in our database. So refresh your schema. Now you can see the database has been created. Now we have all the tables, cards, products, and user. So let's run some little SQL query to just fetch some data to see how this works. So I'm going to run a select statement, select all from my cards, and let's run this. So you can see the card information. Same thing can also be done. Select everything from the products. Let's see, we have all the information of the product as well. And the last, select everything from the users. So let's see if we all got the information of all the users as well. Now you can see. So all data has now been gotten using our Python and SQL. So using Python, we're able to scrape data and we're able to load them into a relational database. And this is what you can do as a data analyst or as a data scientist, move data from one point to another point. So this data now is ready for analysis. You can do some cleaning, some manipulation on this data. You can do some analytical process on this data to drive some insights on this data. I hope you enjoyed this project, and I hope it's clear your doubts on how important Python and SQL could be in your journey as a data analyst or as a data engineer. So if you have any question regarding this project, I'm going to be sharing the link to this GitHub repo down in the description below. So if you have any question, feel free to reach out to me or ask your question from the comment section, and I'll be sure to respond to you. Thank you very much, and have a great time. Bye.